So, Guilty Gear Strive Dual Rulers just finished up, and I thought I'd make a quick video giving my thoughts in a more streamlined way than I did on stream. I'm not gonna give like a super in-depth episode by episode review, since that would mean rewatching the series, so I could take more in-depth notes, and I don't think this anime was good enough for a rewatch. So without further ado, let's jump right into the good, the bad, and the Bridget of Guilty Gear Strive Dual Rulers. Oh yeah, and there will be spoilers throughout this video. You've been warned. I was considering leaving this point until the end of the video to kind of complete the "and Bridget" meme from the intro, but I figured I'd just go ahead and get it out of the way. To start off, I think Sin and Soul were both in top form during this anime. It was nice to see Sin finally live up to his potential of being the main character of his story after it was set up that he was kind of Soul's successor in Overture, and it was also really cool to see Soul kind of step down into this mentor role for Sin, now that he's lost a lot of his power after getting the Flame of Corruption removed in Strive. I really like how, even though he was still a capable fighter, the anime also showed that Soul was a little less powerful and had to resort to using his little gadgets and whatnot instead of just tackling every problem head-on like usual. Of course, now I need to talk about the other star of the show, that being Unica. I thought Unica was pretty cool, if not a bit too similar to how Ramlethal was in Excerpt for my liking. I did really enjoy her relationship with Sin, and I thought her turn to being a good guy was handled pretty well. But in the series where every character has such a unique story, I did find myself wishing they had done something to really spice up hers, since, like I said, it is really similar to Ramlethal's, and between the two, Ramlethal's was done way better. Finally, the last major character in this story, Neuro Hammer. I didn't really care for him personally. I think there were certainly interesting ideas present, like, yeah, there probably would be politicians using the continued anti-Gear sentiment to gain a following. That makes sense. I think part of it is just that he was so openly a horrible guy towards Kai and Dizzy at the beginning of the series that it was shocking to me people wouldn't automatically suspect he maybe had something to do with the terrorist who was at the same party he was at, who had a motive that he campaigned in favor of. That being said, he was a decent villain. I vastly preferred when it was the past version of him who was just leveraging his position to manipulate everyone. I thought the future version that was basically a god who only existed to have a 3-episode long world-ending fight felt kind of arbitrary. Prior to the series coming out, I was really hoping he was Crow, since they had kind of have similar designs, and also I'm just a huge fan of this random character who probably isn't ever going to be mentioned again. But after watching the series, I'm glad he wasn't Crow. Now, as far as the side characters go, they were either hit or miss for me. I thought Johnny and Jacko were handled really well. I don't really have many notes about them. Dr. Paradigm was a welcome addition, and a deep cut that I thought they wouldn't make, given that he wasn't in Strive. I wish Kai was given more screen time, but I guess it makes sense that he had to seal Dizzy. That about does it for the lightning round, however, because I do have a lot to say about the next few characters. Dizzy, for one, was a very confusing case to me. As far as her depiction, it's weirdly only kind of in character. By that, I mean, it is very in line with how she is presented in Excerpt, but not at all in line with her recent depiction in Strive. In Strive, she's undergone a huge change to her character, seemingly having full control over her abilities. This change happened entirely off-screen, and I was fully expecting the anime to address it, and it just doesn't. It also creates an issue with the timeline, because now Dizzy's arcade mode has to take place after the anime, but the anime has to take place after Bridget's arcade, and presumably the arcades of every character who came out before her. So it creates this weird disconnect of Strive's arcade modes taking place both before and after Dual Rulers, which is something that really only I care about, but I still don't like it. Next off, Ramlethal, who I thought was criminally underused. She was just kind of stuck guarding Dizzy and Kai for most of the series, which is something a pair of characters I will talk about later probably should have been doing. And she never even got to interact with Unica, despite probably being the one character who really has the personal experience to guide her, having been in an extremely similar situation presumably less than a year ago. Her companion character, Elfeld, however, had a lot more going on throughout the series than she probably should have. She seemed to be the character primarily working with Jacko to investigate Unica's past, to the point she even had an obviously fake-out death, since anyone remotely knowledgeable on Elfeld knows she can easily tank an orbital laser strike. However, Pretty much up until Nerval became a world-ending threat, I was just asking myself, doesn't she have a band to tour with? Why is she on guard dog duty with Ramlethal when Illyria has capable fighters on payroll who can help with that? But at least her inclusion made some sense, unlike our last two remaining side characters, those being Baiken and Bridget. Now on the surface, both of their inclusions seem fine because they're bounty hunters, so they'd be after Unica. However, the circumstances they appear in is what can be called into question. Baiken, for one, said she was on payroll with the US, even though she's weaker than Gold Lewis, who's like an official US secretary, yet was mysteriously missing for the whole series. Then there was Bridget, who never stated that she was after Unica. She just kinda happened to show up where Unica was like 3 times and then give her a pep talk that probably should have been given by Ramlethal. If you've watched my streams or my VODs, you probably are aware that I don't really like Bridget, but I was really hoping my opinion could be changed by this anime. Unfortunately, once again, I was proven right that the writers just don't have any idea what to do with her, and she was haphazardly thrown into this anime to appeal to her very large fan base that probably wouldn't have watched this anime otherwise. I feel like Baiken was also just thrown in for marketing reasons as well, which is even more unfortunate because I am a huge Baiken fan and I wished she had more to do. But since Unica's plot is more based around finding herself than revenge, Baiken couldn't really offer her anything of value, so I guess that's one thing Bridget has over her. Now that I'm done talking about the characters actually in the anime, let's talk about the ones that weren't. To start off, let's talk about May and Testament. What May and Testament have in common is that, aside from Johnny, they are 2 of the characters closest to Dizzy. While I can buy that they wouldn't be at the first wedding, given that Testament is probably still a little wary of humans, and Johnny might have feared any jellyfish pirates who attended would get arrested, therefore only risking his own neck instead of anyone else's and telling the others not to come. I think it's a little ridiculous that May and Testament don't immediately join Jacko and Elfeld on the front lines of the investigation following Unica's attack on the wedding. They're as close to her family as Jacko and Elfeld. I absolutely would be just as motivated. Instead, they both just get brief blink and you'll miss it cameos while Bridget is integral to Unica's arc. The next few characters I'll discuss are Gold Lewis, Giovanna, Zato, and Milia. What do these guys have in common, you might be asking? Well, all 4 are members of their respective government's defense force. Gold Lewis is the Secretary of Absolute Defense, Giovanna is a member of the Secret Service, and Zato and Milia are the top brass of the new Post-War Administration Bureau, and not a single one shows up after the terrorist attacks on their countries that weren't even a full day apart. You'd think all 4 of them would be doing something alongside Leo and Vernon, but I guess they all just conveniently happened to take a vacation until you saw a blink and you miss it background cameo of Zato and Milia defending against the Nerval clones. I could live with them not being super major players or whatever, but again, Bridget is essential to Unica's character growth, and Baiken is, for some reason, the only agent operating on behalf of the US. Yet, Zato and Milia couldn't even do their jobs and help defend the crystallized bodies of their boss and his soon-to-be wife. And Gold Lewis and Giovanna couldn't even help defend the weapon of mass destruction being publicly shown off at a terrorist attack in Illyria. Speaking of... Like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to go episode by episode picking apart every little detail, but there are 2 major story elements I need to talk about. For one, as previously touched on, why in the hell did Vernon think it was a good idea to show off a weapon the US used in the Crusade against Gears not even a day after a terrorist attack perpetuated by someone who was openly against Gears? Like seriously. Did no one think to push back this peace summit by like a week? The plot wouldn't have necessarily been affected that heavily by Vernon not being an idiot, but it still kind of grinded my gears while it was happening. Not affecting the plot is something that cannot be said, however, about Axel. You may have noticed I never mentioned Axel in the section about characters. Well, that was because Axel basically wasn't a character in this show. He was a plot device to allow Unica to exist and allow Nerval to actually pose a threat once Unica turned on him. To put it plainly, the plot hinges on Axel traveling to the future and then getting captured by Nerval so he can go to the past, completely ignoring how Nerval managed to keep Axel captured for a prolonged period of time. Why would Axel go to the future in the first place? One thing this anime was pretty consistent on was using the characters' older designs from older games to show the time period a scene was taking place in. One example that comes to mind is in the scene where Kai and Dizzy give up Sin to Soul. Soul is pretty clearly in his X2 design, and Kai seems to be in a transition from his X2 look to his Overture look. Another example is in the very first scene where both Dizzy and Kai are in their outfits from X/X2 as the narrator was detailing their first meeting. What I'm trying to basically say is that the Axel that traveled to the future and got kidnapped was most definitely Strive Axel, who has full control over his powers. The narrator even reinforced in the episode that it was revealed that Axel has full control over his abilities. That brings up a huge question. Why did Axel go to the future in the first place? It seems extremely out of character for him. He's always been a more in-the-moment type of character. So why would he want to know what happens in the future? Other than just being curious, he really had no reason to go. He's already resolved not to go to the past, since that will destroy the current timeline according to Ino, so all of his friends are in the present. And to make it even odder, his girlfriend, Megami, was brought to the present by Ino in her dying moments in Strive. So why would Axel just go to the future on a whim? His entire world is in the Kirin now. So it makes no sense why Axel would just do that. And the entire plot of Dual Rulers hinges on Axel acting out of character. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the animation and the soundtrack. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, both aren't very good. During the fight scenes, the animation basically boils down to stills of characters interrupted by flashing lights and shapes, which had me feeling kinda lightheaded, and I'm not even epileptic. The backgrounds and even some whole shots in general were also pretty bad, and genuinely just looked like they ran out of time, so they just threw in some storyboard art because they needed to get this anime out on a deadline. As far as I'm aware, this anime was a Crunchyroll exclusive, so they probably had a really low budget and a really low frame of time to make it. I would honestly go as far as to say I prefer how the story modes look in the games, and those look like bad SFM animations half the time, but at least I can tell what's happening. The music is where I was really disappointed, however. The opening and ending were both just kind of generic and really lacked that spark from actual Guilty Gear music, and the stuff in the soundtrack was similarly boring. I was waiting for that one fight scene where they finally decided to play some stuff from Strive, but it never came. Overall, I'd say this anime wasn't very good. It did some things I liked, and I'm still excited for Unica, who, at the time of writing, hasn't been released, but there were a lot of flaws. I honestly would probably be able to forgive all of them if the Axel thing didn't exist, but oh well. I'd say if you're a fan of Guilty Gear's story and haven't already watched it for some reason, go for it, at least for the purposes of understanding Unica's character when she comes out. But if you're not a fan of Guilty Gear, or even just don't care about the plot of the series, just skip out and you won't be missing much. That's about all I've got, so all that's really left to say is later, Gators.